So in my previous video, I went over a Shred Druid build that was very good for pretty much all endgame content, but a few small changes to that build and you can make it significantly stronger, specifically for pit pushing. This build is obviously going to be doing a lot more damage and have a lot more survivability in any content, but it is a bit more tailored at higher tier pit pushing, and it should allow you to get up to like pit 100. I can pretty easily farm like 90s if I'm just leveling up glyphs with this version of the build. So starting off, we can go over our mythics and our uniques. Starting with Air Perdition, this is basically just a big stat stick. The crit is very nice and the multiplicative damage increase for its special effect is really nice, but all the other stats are going to be useful in some way. Then we have Shroud of False Death, primarily for the +1 to all passives. That stat is absolutely absurd, but it also has +2 all stats, which helps get the secondary effect for all the rare nodes throughout your Paragon boards. So again, kind of a stat stick, but we don't really care about the special effect on this. Then for our final mythic, Ring of Starless Skies, spending your primary resource reduces the cost of that and increases the damage. And then the stats on this are also very good with a really high crit chance roll, more to core skills, more attack speed, and a lucky hit are actually all really heavily wanted stats with this build. So all of our mythics are pretty much just big stat sticks. Then for our uniques, we're using Tibalt's Will, which gives you increased damage when unstoppable. It'll also gain you some primary resource. The stats on this are also very nice, specifically the attack speed, the critical strike chance are very good for shoring up some things we want in this build. And then we have our unique necklace, the Malefic Crescent, which its special is Lupine Ferocity's critical strike damage is increased by 200% for consecutive critical strikes. So this is our capstone passive in our skill tree, where it's basically just giving us a ridiculous amount of increased critical strike damage. There's also some unique rolls on this necklace, specifically percentage willpower, which doesn't come on legendaries anymore, feral aptitude, which you can't normally get on necklaces. So there's also some pretty good affix rolls on this as well. And then next up, we have our abilities in our skill tree. 1 into Maul, which we are actually going to use to stack one of our passives. Then 5 into Shred, our main damaging ability. Upgrade 1 increases its attack speed and gives us healing when enemies are struck. And then Primal Shred, all of its attacks are now dashes and get increased critical strike damage. So all 3 of the attacks of Shred are now a dash, very good for movement. Then we're going down. We are now having 5 points into Earthen Bulwark. This will tie into one of our rune sets, which are actually one of the bigger changes to this build, but this is just a really big barrier. Upgrade 1 makes us unstoppable. Upgrade 2 gives you Fortify. 5 points into Cyclone Armor for non-physical damage reduction. And when we're in Grisly Rage and can't actually activate this, it still gives us the passive portion of this, even though we can't use it. Upgrade 1 makes enemies vulnerable when they get hit by it. Upgrade 2 pulls everything in. This is super good when we're not in Grisly Rage. You want to use this as much as possible to group everything together. Then 1 point into Bloodhound, just a big heal. Upgrade 1 reduces the cooldown on hitting bosses or killing enemies. Upgrade 2 generates Spirit, which can actually be helpful with this version of the build. And then you deal increased damage until you shapeshift out of Werewolf. Then we're going all the way down 5 points into Grisly Rage, which is just a big increase to a lot of different things. Upgrade 1 makes us unstoppable. Upgrade 2, we get a bunch of Fortify per second. Then we have our passives. 1 into Heart of the Wild to get 3 into Wild Impulse. These, of course, goes cost more but deal more damage. 3 into Predatory Instinct for crit chance against close enemies. We're always going to be close to enemies, but if you have good rolls on some of your items that have crit chance or you have greater affixes on them and you have like 95 to 100% crit, you probably won't need this. So you can go more move speed or more defensives. Then we have 3 into Enchanted Fortitude for increased resistances, 3 into Vigilance for DR after using a defensive, and 3 into Backlash for increased damage after using a defensive. We'll be using defensives all the time. Also, because of one of our rune sets, we'll constantly be proccing Earthen Bulwark, which will proc these as well. Then we have 3 into Feral Aptitude, increased damage while healthy, more increased damage while above 100% move speed, which would be all the time, and those stack. 1 into Charge Atmosphere, primarily to get 3 into Electric Shock, which is a lucky hit, a chance to immobilize enemies. When you hit immobilize enemies, you deal increased damage to them. Then we have 2 of our final points into Mending. This is primarily for increased max life, because our Earthen Bulwark also gives us more shielding based off of our life. So this is actually just more shielding as well. So you'll be a lot more tanky. 1 into Neurotoxin, so poison enemies are slowed. 3 into Toxic Claws for increased poison damage, doubled while in Werewolf. 3 into Envenom for increased critical strike damage against poison enemies. And then at 3 into Quick Shift, shapeshifting into an animal form gives you increased damage stacking up. So basically you just maul, shred, maul, shred, maul, shred until you get 6 stacks. Then when you stay in any animal form, this duration doesn't go down. We have Heightened Senses. When shapeshifting, Werebear guarantees you damage reduction reduction. Werewolf grants you increased move speed, and these will just stay when you're in any animal form. And then lupine ferocity, every third werewolf skill critically hits, can help a little bit with this version of the build, but then werewolf critical strikes deal massively increased damage, and this is increased by our unique necklace. So just absurdly high damage increase from our crits. And then we have our Paragon boards. Our first board, we have the Headhunter glyph, a bonus to normal nodes within range. The secondary is increased damage to elites. Legendaries increased damage. The first board is going to be Lust for Carnage. Critical strikes with werewolf skills restore 2 spirit and deal massively increased damage. This is actually going to be really important for this version of the build. The glyph is Fang and Claw, a bonus to magic nodes within range. The secondary is increased damage when enemies are close to you. The legendary is increased shapeshift damage. Then over to the right, Heightened Malice. When an enemy is poisoned near you, increased damage. This stacks up for more enemies. The glyph for taking is Keeper, a bonus to rare nodes within range. You and your companions deal increased non-physical damage, and then increased non-physical damage for the legendary. Then we go up. Constricted Tendrils, which is primarily just increased damage against poison enemies. There's a proc to add more poison, which isn't really important. The glyph for taking is Spirit for increased critical strike damage. The secondary is when you crit an enemy, they take increased damage from you, stacking up. The legendary is increased crit damage. And then the final board is going to be Ancestral Guidance. After spending 75 spirit, deal increased damage, which will be up 100% of the time. The glyph is Dominate for increased overpowered damage. And then going over to the left for our final board, we have Ancestral Guidance. After spending 75 spirit, you deal increased damage. This will be up all the time. The glyph for tank is Undaunted for increased damage while fortified. The secondary is damage reduction while fortified, and the legendary is increased damage. And then we have our spirit boons, Wariness to take reduced damage from elites, Iron Feather for increased max life that'll help with our Earthen Bulwark as well, Avian Wraith for increased critical strike damage, Energize, which is a lucky hit to restore 100 spirit, will basically be all of our spirit. Then we're using Overload, which dealing damage with storm skills will apply a poison. This is primarily why you take this, to easily apply poison to everything at all times. Then the lucky hit is just when dealing poison damage, have a chance of lightning bolt stuff. You can also take Masochistic for more fortify, but I don't really think we need any more fortify, and Overload is just, I guess, a little bit more damage and guaranteed poisoning. So there's not a ton super good in this row. Then we have our Mercenaries. Now you can go Subo if you're not trying to push higher tier pits, but if you are, you're definitely going to want Rahir, because you can go down on the right side and take increase to all resistances by 15%, which is super good. You can also go to the left side for increased armor, but I think the resistances is probably better, because you can also go down to the bottom to get inspiration. So enemies hit by Rahir's different abilities just take multiplicative damage increases from you, which is just really good in general. And then for your divine gifts, these are pretty simple. The top section, Essence of Lies for 4 to 5 per second. The right section, Essence of Scream for increased resistances. The bottom section, Essence of Sin for increased armor. The left section, Essence of Pain, which when you get injured, you get a massive barrier and as a cooldown of 20 seconds. And then that brings us into our gear and our gems. So starting off with our gems, on your main hand and your offhand, you want increased critical strike damage. In one of your pieces of armor, you want double willpower. In your jewelry, you want some mix of diamond jewels and maybe one skull jewel, which gives it physical resistance. The diamonds just resist all you can do, whichever one you want. But then for our rune sets, this is what pretty heavily changes up this build, changes kind of how it feels to play, and changes up a lot of its power. And our rune sets are actually going to work together pretty heavily. So the first one is it casts 2 mobility armor cop skills 4 times, and this will proc the effect of casting a skill other than a basic, consumes all of your primary resource to increase your damage by 100% for 1 second. So this will just be a massive damage burst every 4 shreds, and we shred very quickly, so this will be proccing constantly, but it drains all of your resource. Now basically all you need is to hit something with our shred once, and you will always get enough resources back to be able to shred more. Now sometimes you will drain all of your life and you won't be like in the middle of a shred cast, because you have 3 casts of shred. The first one costs spirit and the other ones are free. So what this generally amounts to is that some of the time you won't be able to shred after this procs, and what you want to do then is just either cast your blood howl or hit a basic, and that will be enough. But sometimes that will happen, which is generally what makes it build a little bit more clunky with this combination, but the damage increase is worth it. And then the other rune set is going to be spend 300% of your maximum resource, so the Pock rune, and then invoke the Druid's Bulwark for 3 seconds, granting yourself a barrier. Our Earthen Bulwark is just our Earthen Bulwark, so it gives us all of the other effects, so it's going to be a massive barrier because we have it ranked up. And this is spend 300% of your maximum resource. Now shred actually costs a lot. We just generate so much spirit that it looks like it costs nothing. We are also spending 100% of our resource every 4 shreds shreds, which is all of the time. So our Earthen Bulwark proc from this will be procking all of the time, which means fortify, massive barriers, just tons of additional defenses. And this is really going to be the rune mix that makes this build just significantly better for higher end content, because you're so much tankier and can deal a lot more damage. And the only downside is that's a little bit more clunky, because sometimes you can't shred after drain all of your resources to get your resources back, so you have to use one of your other abilities. But then for our legendary aspects, you can put the 4 offensives wherever you want. So we have critical strikes with Grisly Rage, increases your damage by 3% up to 120% for 60 seconds. So we go into Grisly Rage, we crit a bunch, we have this big stacking damage buff that stays with us for 60 seconds. And then once we go back into Grisly Rage, which is obviously much faster than 60 seconds, we just refresh the duration. So just a massive damage increase. Then we have Rabid Beast, which you deal increased poison damage, and while Shapeshift, your direct damage is converted into poison damage. So basically all of our damage will be poison. We scale poison damage a ton through a bunch of our different things. Then we have Blurred Beast, so Shred deals increased damage, and Shred has a 35% chance to land an additional strike up to 4 times. Your Shred just deals more damage, and then it can randomly just do a bunch of additional attacks. So basically just massive damage increase. But the additional attacks is actually pretty good, because that generates us additional resources and procs additional things. Then finally, critical strikes with Shred deal up to 60% of its dealt damage as lightning damage to the target and surrounding enemies. So just more damage, and then AoE as well. So you hit one thing in a group really hard, everything else gets some amount of that damage. So this is why you want to group things up, and then you can shred them all down very easily and AoE all of that damage. And you'll be able to follow all of the stats in the description, but some of the main ones are going to be chance for Shred to deal double damage on your main hand and offhand. If you somehow get enough rolls, make sure you don't go over 100%, because that doesn't really do anything. That'd be really hard to get. And then on your ring, you want a chance to make enemies vulnerable. Now you do make enemies vulnerable when you use your Cyclone armor, but that won't be up all the time. So this will just be a way to make enemies vulnerable at all times. But that's the entirety of this updated Shred build for the Druid in Season 11. This is an incredibly strong build. It's obviously going to be much stronger for, say, high tier pit pushing, which is really the only super difficult content right now. But this will probably also be good once we get the tower in January. So this may actually have a really good use once the tower comes out as well. But that's all I want to go over. So thanks for watching.